that's the thing about Geneva, Mick. The streets are paved with chocolate, and that's where I was a couple weeks ago. I know I didn't bring it up before, but when I was in Geneva,
I heard of the street part. I didn't know you were there. You were in Geneva?
I was, yeah. I was just
no one mentioned it.
representing Splunk at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, which is where I was.
I would have heard about that. I would have. Audra, did you hear about this?
I didn't Geneva? Yeah. I just heard about it.
I know. It just gets awkward, and I didn't want people to get all weird about it.
Jealous.
Why was the World Economic Forum in Geneva, New York?
Oddly enough, not Geneva, New York. Geneva, Switzerland, which is where I was.
Oh, the other chocolate. Okay, now it's clear now. Yeah. It's clear. Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Clear. No, that's good. That's good to know. Welcome to Coffee Talk with Serge. Today is the realm. We're going to fight through a lot of technical challenges. I'm here in my living room because I left my mic and camera somewhere in the world, which I don't remember because I was in Geneva recently. I'm still kind of recovering.
Hopefully it wasn't in Geneva.
I don't think it was. No. I think, Audra, you've chosen potato audio and video for the day. Yep. It's a bold move, and we support you with that.
Thank you.
And then Mick, new background.
Traveling man. I'm slowly en route to HushCon for the weekend. So anyone going to HushCon, find me in Seattle.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to Coffee Talk with Serge. We're very excited to be here. We have a lot of things to discuss and go over, and a brand new segment. For those of you who've never joined us before, it should be about 30 to 45 minutes long. Lots of good humor. Audra puts up with a lot of crap throughout the hour, and we also go over the news of the week and things that are interesting to us. So, Audra, I think we're about ready. Lucky, roll us into the next segment.
All right. Well, hopefully my audio is working because I know, as you mentioned, Ryan, we are having technical difficulties today. But so we do have quite a few news stories.
Audra, can you hear us?
Are you messing with me? You're messing with me. I know you're messing with me. Anyway. All right. Moving on. So I wanted to talk about this new research that came out recently from ESET. They tweeted just the other day about a new wave of ransomware attacks, and this was actually just last week, targeting at least 5 organizations in Ukraine. And they're calling this RansomBoggs, and it doesn't appear to be financially motivated. So instead of extortion, they're basically trying to just cause as much disruption as possible. And the interesting thing about this is the authors of this ransomware, they make multiple references to the film Monsters, Inc. Like the ransom note, for instance, I believe is written by Sullivan. I can't remember the exact character's name. It's the monster, the main character of that movie.
Sully. Sully. How do you not know Sully?
It's been a while since I've seen
his formal name is Sullivan.
It's fair.
Sullivan. And that's how it's found. It's the formal name for the ransom note. But anyway, so the PowerShell script that they use to distribute the ransomware from the domain controller, ESET, it says it's almost identical to the one that they saw last April during the Destroyer 2 attacks, which targeted Ukraine's energy sector. So those attacks were attributed to Sandworm, which is the GRU-linked hacking group, which was also behind the NotPetya attack. And I believe the NotPetya attack, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Sandworm got its name because in those attacks, the malware had several references to the Dune novels. So a lot of cultural references with these attacks.
Part of the backstory there is also Drew Robinson is a huge nerd, and that's what you get when you have nerds naming malware groups. It's
you find it, you name it. Them's the rules. I don't make them.
Yeah, the convention, which is where I was last week. This is interesting to me. Audra, we dug a little bit into this, and from your reading, you're probably the most knowledgeable on this specific ransomware. But GRU, SVR. Actually, Mick, let's go back to your life and back when you had a real job at the White House. Like, what is the difference between words like GRU, SVR, like these groups? We hear the words GRU, but what does it matter?
Like to the everyday person, it doesn't. A finite attribution, it matters to us nerds, but to a grander scale, no, it's like one country. Let's say it all ties back to the Russian government who is directing the Russian military operations and so on and so on. But this, it's not sandworm because it's different. See, it's not financially motivated. It's like when Captain America has to hide and he has like the really crappy sunglasses and hat on, so it's someone completely different. This is a really obvious, like, not even subtle attempt at, no, this is misdirection. This is just disruption, right? The attacks are linked. This is either someone with a grudge or someone who wants to cause disruption in Ukraine. And that's a really limited number of possible attackers.
Right.
I find this interesting. We've been talking about this a lot with ransomware, as we do quite a bit. And some of the work that we found was really this migration from ransomware as a finance operation to a disruption, right? We saw China earlier this year was, finishing off APT activities by dropping ransomware. Now we see Ukraine doing similar. Actually the threat research team for Splunk did a whole write-up on some of the Ukrainian wiper malware earlier this year, I think in March. And this is reality what it is, right? Like, we're not trying to get money, we're just trying to ruin systems, which is a logical progression. I mean, it's the use of a war, but
this would be the equivalent of dropping some kind of strike on a fuel depot or an arms depot. This is essentially it. You're trying to disrupt operations against an adversary, and this is one way to do it, and it's pretty effective.
Yeah, but we've talked about this before, right? Like, if there's one thing the Russian-Ukraine war has kind of put into context is how cyber is a skirmishing tool, but not necessarily the most effective. When you can knock out a power plant with a cruise missile, as they're doing every day right now, okay, well, you ransomed us, you got us. We're gonna
you got me. Yeah.
But I think this is the reality of joint combined warfare in a modern age, right? Like, this is low cost, relatively low effort compared to a cruise missile. It could set them back days or hours, and if you do this enough, you're going to have issues, right? It's about you called it, Mick, disruption, not termination, not completion.
I mean, you got to think, if I am the attacker, if I'm Russia right now, let's say Russia is behind, there's not 100% attribution, never will be, but let's say it is the Russian government behind, the Russian Federation behind these attacks. There's a good chance that toolkit, you might not have use for it next year. You might not be around, so you might as well, use it all up now.
Yeah, and I am, it's interesting that we haven't seen a ransomware attack to the scale of NotPetya, because that happened, in 2017? And the amount of financial damage that caused, I mean, it extended beyond Ukraine, right? It hit Maersk and some other companies outside of the country, but just the impact it had on operations. I mean, you made a good point with, missiles, you can accomplish a lot more damage quickly, but financial damage, you could argue could be equally as destructive or hurting morale in a war. So, it is interesting. We haven't seen that.
There's an economist who believes the primary reason for the Good Friday Agreement between Britain and the IRA was because of the cost of broken windows in London City due to car bombs that were not killing people, but were causing insurance claims, and it was going to decimate parts of the London economics. And like a significant economist says, this was one of the driving factors. So there's sandworm.
I just remembered I had this behind me, and it's been a minute since I've read this, but I believe there are references to the Dune novels in this.
There is.
book.
There is.
Drew and John Holquist.
The whole investigation.
All nerds, all of them.
Nerds, yes.
Nerds.
So good book if you're interested in learning about, it's called Sandworm by Andy Greenberg.
There we go.
With the background of all that. So anyway, moving on, we have another ransomware story, of course. And this is a report by The Record. They're saying this group called Yanloeng, if I'm saying that right. It's a ransomware group, and their discussion chats appear to have been hacked. Some 2,700 messages were leaked online. And interestingly enough, the conversations were all in Russian. So this confirms some suspicions held by some researchers that the members of this group may have been masquerading as Chinese hackers. And I'm just curious what you think about this, because it is another example of why attribution can be so difficult, when groups are pretending to be something that they're not.
First off, having had the chili from Cincinnati, I mean, maybe stop making yourself such a threat. right? Like literally a threat to the world is this Cincinnati chili that people keep talking about. It's horrific. And frankly, I think anyone associated with Cincinnati deserves to be ransomware. That's my hot take. Just because of Skyline chili. That's,
this guy.
Oh gosh.
False flag attribution thing, right? Like, there was a great talk by Jags and Brian when they were over at Kaspersky for false flag attribution about 6 years ago. Highly recommend. I think they gave it 3,000 times, so I'm sure you can find a recording somewhere where they went into ugly gorilla and how groups were dropping clues to threat researchers and REs about the ransomware authors and attribution, and it gets kind of rough where it goes through. Mick, you had a lot more experience with Chinese groups than I did.
So that's the thing. It's I'm trying to be X person, and it's the game, right? Like it's part of the espionage game. It's part of operations. It's part of the intelligence cycle. It doesn't surprise me, but it also wouldn't surprise me if it was a deliberate attempt to have that leaked out. I think the ransomware operations for any nation save North Korea, are not the primary driver behind what they do. Yeah. So I think this ransomware group is, probably a small splinter, if anything, and their impact is probably minimal in the greater scheme. So, it's leaked. Is it Russian? But are they acting on behalf of the Russian military? Is it side, moonlighting type thing? It's really interesting. So I guess it would be a lesson. Don't believe everything you read on the internet.
What if it's verified?
As someone who is verified.
Verified means something totally different now. So.
Yeah. Audra, you've been doing research on You've been doing research on EDU and ransomware and hacking. Like, how do you feel about this? Despite their chili, obviously, we would hope that no school would be a victim for this with their finances. But this is not a new thing, is it?
Well, no. So our next story is actually about a college. This is Cincinnati State Technical and Community College, which was hit by ransomware and posted on Vice Society's leak site over the weekend. So some of this leaked data reportedly dates back several years. So it's unclear if these ransomware operators had access to their network that far back, or if they were able to, retrieve records from there. And it also includes personally identifiable information in the data that was leaked. And so I actually pulled some statistics about ransomware targeting schools, because MCSoft has been tracking this and doing a really good job of keeping tabs on how many schools and universities that they're aware of that have been attacked with ransomware that are publicly known. Because again, with these numbers, it's hard to really get full understanding, because there could be situations where it's not reported, or it could be, behind the scene negotiations and we don't know about it. But they're reporting that 1,043 schools in the United States were impacted by a ransomware attack last year in 2021. And that includes 26 colleges and universities. And this year, there have already been 1,875 schools impacted by ransomware in the US. And I don't know how many of those are higher education, but it just goes to show that the numbers that we know of are increasing, which could be a sign of potentially an increase in attacks.
There we go. What else do we have today?
Well, so this, I actually saw David Barnes in the chat wrote that for the ESET, I believe, the ESET Research story, that it could be a cover for a nation state attack if you have it as a financially motivated attack. And this kind of ties in to our next story about Iranian hackers using Log4Shell to mine cryptocurrency on a US federal network. So CISA put out an alert earlier this month that a network was compromised as early as February by Iranian government-sponsored APT actors. And so the Washington Post has this awesome newsletter called Cybersecurity 202, and they're reporting that the group known as Nemesis Kitten is behind this attack, and they are believed to have exploited Log4Shell to install this crypto mining software. And this is targeting Merit Systems Protection Board, which is the federal agency that hears grievances from federal employees. So again, it's unclear if this was used as a cover for espionage, or if these these hackers were moonlighting and trying to make money on the side. It's unclear, but it's still, regardless, it goes to show that Log4Shell is still a problem and it's still being actively exploited.
Yeah, we're not going to see that go away
ever.
And I've talked to customers, I've talked to people who said, oh yeah, we got it locked down on the external immediately, but it's going to take us 2 to 3 years internal to upgrade everything we have. And so what would be interesting about this, is were they compromised from an external exploit in, or did they have access already and then utilize the Log4Shell for a pivot and further escalation because it was so trivial to run? Do a scan, maybe use Havij. I don't know.
What? Kitten groups would never do that.
Never. There you go. That's Kovar attribution. Acunetics and Havij. I know who you are.
I know who you are. All right. IRG Sabat. Anyway, so I don't know enough about it to say whether it was, a cover for espionage or whether it was just some cats making money. Get it? Cats making money. Anyway, I do think that it falls in the same vein as we see the colleges and universities being targeted by ransomware. It just feels like low-hanging fruit, targets of opportunity, and those are always going to be the victims more often than not. With colleges and universities, that their budgets don't really go to IT and IT security. And the Merit Systems Protection Board, I've never actually heard of them, but, I didn't have grievances from federal employees. I didn't aware that you were allowed to have any. So we just didn't do that. If it was a cover for espionage, there's the perfect place to find some people with an axe to grind and kind of use them for leverage. It's also a perfect place to make some money because those network defenders probably have a minimal budget lower than colleges and universities to throw security at to prevent something like this. So it's really, or it could be both. It could be that magical hybrid thing that Ryan mentioned earlier, that it's the new world we live in and we can make money and steal some things.
Why not both?
Why not both? Okay. And our last story, this is a follow-up to the Medibank cyber attack. This is one of Australia's largest health insurance providers, and they were hit with a cyber attack. But the extortion site used for that cyber attack recently went offline, and this comes after the Australian government said that it would hit back at the criminals behind the hack, who they say are based in Russia. So more than 1,500 health claim records were leaked already as part of this attack. So it's unclear if the site going down had anything to do with like an offensive operation by the Australian government, or if this was just, a regular instance of a site being down, which is not uncommon for some of these leak sites occasionally.
I mean, certainly if you listen to Risky Business and Patrick Gray, they are all about telling ACSC to, ASD to release the dogs of war.
And I get that, and I get that part, right? But if serving, and I understand governments operate differently, but you look at like the U.S. response to Colonial Pipeline when, the big arm of Uncle Sam kind of smacks somebody down. The only thing better than offensive operations is talking about it. And I haven't seen anyone from those Australian groups saying, oh, look what we did, because the FBI is all about doing that.
I mean, ASD did say in 2020 that they were, where is the term here? It will employ its offensive cyber capabilities against threat actors who are using COVID-19 themed attacks. We are hitting back with the ASD and have already successfully disrupted activities from foreign criminals by disabling their infrastructure and blocking access to stolen information. Some of these criminals have even posed as health officials in an attempt to exploit vulnerable Australians by infecting their computers with malware and stealing their information. So, I mean, that's pretty, at least they're confirming it. I mean, no one is coming back from those groups and saying what's happening.
That's fair.
That's true. Yep. So that's just an update, and it'll be interesting to see if that website comes back up or if it stays down. If it stays down for a while, that could indicate that it may have been something bigger than an issue on their servers or whatever. So
it's just renovating.
We have a new segment, Ryan, that we're excited about. Yeah.
Let's roll a clip, Lucky. See what happens. Home offices of people who don't want to be named, Surge's top 10 list of the day. There we go. So we're going to go through this week. This week's top 10 list is the top 10 worst things that we heard for last month's cybersecurity awareness. So coming in at number 10, we have don't buy new USB drives with supply chain compromise. Just use the ones in the parking lot. I can't see this going wrong at all. Everything's going to be fine. I have a 1 out of 2 laughs here. Mick, still not happy with this segment. What do we have for number 9, Lucky? Emails are for clicking. You know, don't waste that opportunity. When someone sends you a note, make sure you open it up. That's how you're going to find out if you got spearphished. Number 8. That LinkedIn invite from Iran is a legitimate business opportunity. Every time that I have someone send me a LinkedIn invite from a nuclear power plant in Iran asking me for help with their Splunk instance, I say, yes, let me look at that PDF of problems you have. And then I send it to Mick for review. Number 7, passwords are hard to remember. Double dip by reusing. This makes perfect sense to me. Just increment or reuse. If you use the same password across every site that's really complicated, it's just easier to do. Number 6, encryption is only for criminals. We'll be talking about this a little bit later, but if you're a good God-fearing person with nothing being horrible, why would you want your stuff encrypted? Just leave it open, just like your email. Number 5, MFA is for Muppets. Don't use MFA or else you'll look like Mick and also Mick and Mac. Don't care what Jenny Easterly says about Muppet factor authentication. Just use single. It's good enough for everyone else. Number 4, hackers can be identified by their hoodies and basements. No basement, no hoodie. These two don't have. See, we're blue team. Super easy. That's how you can find out who the bad people are. Number 3, be responsive to your CEO when they need gift cards. Listen, sometimes in the middle of a meeting, your CEO is going to be like, I can't close this unless I bribe them with Amazon gift cards. He can't do it in the meeting. She can't do it in the meeting. They're going to have to send you a text. It's going to be super urgent and respond back, right? Like, no worries there. Number 2, wait to patch a couple weeks to make sure there aren't any issues. This is the easiest one I can think of. When patches come out, they're often bug-ridden. You don't want to get a system ruined. Just wait a couple weeks. You'll be fine. Hackers don't move that quickly. You'd rather have stable, up-to-date systems. And coming up for number 1, the worst bit of advice we've heard, abbreviate Computer Security Awareness Month to save time. And if you don't have that one, boy, howdy, have we seen that quite a bit this month. CSAM is a real thing, and it is not Computer Security Awareness Month. So with that, we will close this segment. If you liked it, say something. If you hate it, don't say anything. I don't want to feel bad about myself. I have Mick here for that. So that's the news segment, top 10. Next one, Mick has to write. It's going to be solid. What else do we have coming up?
We have some events coming up that I believe, Ryan, you have more information because this is Gov Summit related, right? So we have
Gov Summit.
Yes, I've been removed from the image.
Been removed from the image due to bad audio. Mick and I will be in DC in 2 weeks for Gov Summit on November 14th, which is a Wednesday. But right before that, we're going to have a very special edition of Gov Summit. Audra is getting her learning on. She's going to be at a SANS course. So we're bringing in Kirsty Payne, who used to work in the UK government. So she's very similar to Mick and I, that we all have public sector backgrounds. She's going to be joining us for a riotous discussion around privacy, public policy, and hopefully not math, because she's a lot smarter about that than Mick and I are. But we also have a very special segment for that particular group. Next slide, Lucky. Maybe. There we go. We are going to have a pre-recorded interview with Gary Steele and Juliana Vita. They're going to have to play a game that I'm creating for them, and the last person standing gets to be CEO for the day. So Juliana, you have some things going on there we're hoping to see, but look out for that. It's going to be great. Minimally going to try to make Gary really uncomfortable, but still have a job by the end of it. So that is my goal. So stay tuned for Gov Summit on the 13th or 14th, but the Splunk Surge Coffee Talk will be on the 13th on Tuesday and a little bit earlier than normal. for the East Coast folks who are primarily public sector. So that's what we have there.
Awesome. Yeah, Kirsty's amazing. So I'm really looking forward to that episode. I'll have to watch it after the fact because I'll be in a class, but really looking forward to that. But let's go ahead.
I am watching Paddington Bear in preparation.
There we go.
All right, let's roll the 60-second charity challenge clip.
And now, Splunk's Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck!
All right, so in today's 60-second charity challenge, we are talking about network surveillance. So last week, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission voted unanimously to adopt rules banning the import or sale of telecom equipment from Chinese companies, including Huawei and ZTE, over national security concerns. And at the same time, the British government recently banned the installation of surveillance cameras manufactured by Chinese companies at sensitive locations due to potential security issues. So Mick and Ryan, I wanted to ask you what you think people watching should know about network surveillance and what's possible when it comes to government surveillance or ISPs.
Makes sense. I was not here last show. Who won? Was that Mick or a special guest?
So we both won. We're all winners.
We're all winners.
I think as recompense for your time in Geneva, you go first.
Which is where I was for that show.
I don't have any chocolate, so I don't believe you.
It's I was gonna bring some, but you're just not a very good human, so I decided not.
I get it.
I will go first. Lucky, give me a countdown. Okay, when you have nations that are competing against each other for commercial or military advantage, as China against the US, China against the UK, most Five Eyes are, they're going to do the best they can to get as much information as possible from any source. This is especially true for China. Over the years, there's been so much documented about the million grains of sand sort of mentality they have for intelligence collection. Huawei is a Chinese company, although it claims not to be owned by the Chinese government, but instead is owned by a labor union that solicits donations from employees when their colleagues have health problems and the like. That's a direct quote. No one has any clue what that means. They even go on to say no Chinese government owns shares in Huawei, but they also have never offered private shares. Ownership is murky. Why does this matter? At least for the US and the UK, there are legitimate concerns about Huawei having access to sensitive information that traverses their network equipment. Some would argue that this is a moot issue since the majority of US and Five Eyes equipment is manufactured in China, but I think it does matter that the governments have made a stand against Chinese intelligence collection. There we go.
All right, Mick.
Okay. All right. So between you and the internet is someone else. Always going to be. That's just the way it works. Between you and you mail a letter, there's someone else. Now, the reason why networking gear becomes so critical and so important is because if I'm a nation state and I'm trying to collect everything, it's like fishing. And when I have a big net, I'm going to catch a few dolphins in there, unless the point is to catch those dolphins all along. And that's what I want to do. So with networking gear, I want to put that on the backbone of as many systems as I can, because that way I can just cast a wider net. If I'm collecting things, I have much more data to choose from, much more data to pull from. Now, the problem being, and I guess just the why way it goes, is that you are an adversarial nation-state government, and the United States is not going to let that happen. The United Kingdom's not going to let that happen. I don't think it's going to be as big a problem as people think. There's going to be workarounds for that for a nation-state, but it's good to let people know that there are other people watching what they do.
All right. Well, before I say anything, does anyone watching have an opinion on who won? Because
let's see.
It's always a difficult choice. So
I don't think it's that difficult, Audra. I mean,
he is your boss. So.
And one person is a bad human who doesn't deserve chocolate. So.
All right. Well,
yeah, but Audra didn't get to.
Who said she didn't?
Well, I like, Mick, how you always, you reference that there's always between you and the internet, there's someone else. And I think that's an important thing to remember, whether it's metadata or who knows what. Depending on the technology, I think that's something to keep in mind. And that kind of ties into our next conversation about end-to-end encryption, which we'll get to in a minute. the importance of that, and kind of what you mentioned, Ryan, in your 10 things segment, that, if you don't have anything to hide, why do you need encryption? Well, just privacy. There we go. And that's a good enough answer. So I'm going to go with Ryan today.
That's such bullshit.
But it was a tough call, and no one weighed in on the chat. So
no, we have someone who split the Gordian knot of both won my vote.
Oh, really? I didn't see. I'm behind on my chat here. But all right.
This is why Lucky votes. All right, this is why we let Lucky vote. Okay.
Yeah, this is why we let Lucky vote. 100%. This is the good news there.
All right. So.
And what is our charity today?
The charity today is Red by the One campaign, and this is because World AIDS Day is coming up on December 1st. So we decided to donate to Red, which was founded in the fight against AIDS. So that is the charity this week. And with that, let's go ahead and transition now to the deep dive.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
All right, so back.
I would like to point out that the audience is coming out resoundingly with me being the victor. So I feel
right. Yeah, your bot army has been activated. I got it.
Well, all right. So back to what I said about end-to-end encryption. This is a topic. I mean, there's a lot of topics right now with Twitter, but this is the one we decided to talk about today. Twitter. What?
Never heard of it.
What's going on?
Weird way to pronounce Mastodon, but sure.
So Elon Musk has mentioned, or there were reports that he's mentioned potentially implementing end-to-end encryption for messaging on Twitter, which is a pretty big deal. And he said to employees reportedly that he had talked with the creator of Signal, Moxie Marlinspike, about potentially helping with this. Which seems to be a big endeavor. I know Meta has worked for the last several years to try to implement end-to-end encrypted messaging on its platforms. So it's not something that's really been done overnight or in, even just a few months. It's a big process. Yeah. So I'm curious what you think about, the feasibility of implementing this, especially since Twitter's had quite a few layoffs recently, and the software engineering required to implement encryption like that.
I'm no software developer, but I think you just type import Signal and you're pretty much done.
Then you're covered. Okay, so it isn't overnight.
It's interesting to me in the context of the conversation we just had around Huawei, which is, if you can't trust your networking equipment, if you can't trust the provider not to read your DMs, then does end-to-end encryption kind of resolve some of that issue? And I think it does. And I honestly think that's where everyone should be moving to, because as Mick said, you have no clue who's on the backbones of what. And being able to have that confidence of end-to-end encryption for your information, I think makes a lot of sense. I like going for it. It's just an interesting, of all the things you can improve, it's interesting that's the area that they're focusing on. But this is not a conversation about Twitter's business practices. This is around end-to-end encryption, I suppose.
Well, you said something interesting about trust, right? Because encryption, there is a trust component to that. And if there's not enough trust in place before it's implemented, does that affect the outcome? Do you know what I'm saying?
Mick, you have a lot of trust issues. What are your thoughts?
I do have trust issues, especially when technology is involved. I think if the concern and super, surface level take on it was, hey, Twitter admins can read my DMs. Hey, Mastodon admins can read my DMs. That's going to be true of anything that you use if you're using a party service. And that's the way it goes because it's a third-party service. Adding a layer of encryption in, I think it's a technical feat. It's going to take some time to do. I don't think it's impossible. I think we've seen it done on other social media platforms. Yeah. I don't think it's like the savior, for the negativity surrounding Twitter, but I think it's a step in the right direction. I mean, I don't really care what platform it is. If you're introducing encrypted messaging end to end, that's fantastic, because I think it's kind of forced at that level. Ryan, you back me up
Uh-oh.
Things we'll never find. I'm not going to say that Big Brother didn't like what Mick had to say, but I, for one, welcome
Yeah.
encryption. So yeah, today, the day of goblins in our networking and AV. Audra, you've kind of been our privacy go-to for search. It's something you're really passionate about. I mean, I don't think it's interesting for how much controversy and discussion there was around this. I also haven't heard anyone saying like, this is a horrible idea. It's been like, great.
Yeah, wow. I think this would, if it is implemented, which right now it's just something that's being discussed and there's no timeline or actual plan that I've seen. But if it does happen, I think that would be a huge win for privacy proponents. And I don't see any negative surrounding it. I think the only issue on Twitter's end would be, you know, it seems like there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through in terms of whether there would be any backlash with, you know, because a big thing with investigations, with police investigations, right? If there's end-to-end encrypted messaging, that could, you know, prevent an investigation. Those are some of the things people bring up when they're making counterpoints to this, which obviously I'm all about privacy, and I think end-to-end encryption should be implemented in as many places as possible because it just makes sense to me. And I wish that Apple messaging and Android and all of it would just be how it comes. I think that would be really nice.
Yeah, Josh Wilson just wrote in, let's bring back XMPP, which, boy, that brings back some memories. And I do remember being at DEF CON, where we used to sponsor the Wall of Sheep and putting the Wall of Sheep up on. And one of the days we realized that Grindr, not Tinder, but Grindr actually had unencrypted DMs and messages that were just on the network. So if your phone had connected to the Wi-Fi at DEF CON and you were using Grindr, you know, all that information was clear text. And then I'm always shocked by how many people don't realize that the normal SMTP email you sent is completely unencrypted, and that as it traverses, it can be read by everyone in the chain. It's not unless you're using PGP, unless you're using PKI, unless you're encrypting it, you know, that's all out there, plain text. You know, people can read it, do analysis on it, and it's only but by the trust of your admin staff that you're able to assume that you have that privacy.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even the difference between end-to-end encryption and encryption in transit, right? Because that's a common misconception as well, that some people might read, oh, it's encrypted messaging, but it's not encrypted at rest. It's not encrypted, you know, someone with access to that server could read your messages potentially. So that's also something to keep in mind. But I am interested, Ryan, too. I wanted to ask you before we end this about, you know, the switch to Mastodon.
Where it was. Oh, sorry. I didn't.
Well, you brought up Mastodon before in this episode while you were away in another country, but we were talking about a Mastodon, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about this mass migration and also just people posting on both platforms, because I'm on both, and it just seems like a lot of extra work to go back and forth.
I've claimed my handle MeanSec on Mastodon, although I haven't gone into posting that much on there. And obviously with Thanksgiving, the only thing I was really posting was hashtag cooking with Kovar and turkey tips. Yes. So as always, cyber is a far third for my Twitter account after my dogs and cooking. I don't know. I like the concept of Mastodon. I think one of the things I personally really appreciated about Twitter was that it was one platform for everyone. And it feels like the federated servers, although you can read things in other places, it isn't quite as good. Oh, you survived the hitman.
Man, I don't know what happened there.
I mean, as we've always said, Audra, the good rule of thumb is if your threat model involves the Mossad, you're just screwed. But somehow, Mick has survived. I haven't made the full switch over to Mastodon. I also have really reduced my Twitter using lately. I think I probably will switch over to Mastodon eventually, but I'm kind of on the fence of where that goes. But a lot of folks have moved on to InfoSec server on there. So it's an interesting area.
I made an account. DT stood up a DEF CON Mastodon server for all the goons, all the folks. And I think I've what is it called? Tooting? Is that what it's like the knockoff thing is? Whatever it is. Like I did one, and it's just I don't get it. We'll see what happens, right? I am, but I mostly made an account so that no one else could.
We'll teach you how to toot. No,
Yeah.
not saying that ever again.
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Yeah, we're just see right off the bat. That's I don't even like what the verb is for using Mastodon. I think we'll close it there. For those of you still watching, thank you as always. We will be back in 2 weeks, but a little bit of an earlier time. Like I said, we're going to try to make it a little bit East Coast, U.S. East Coast, and EMEA centric to bring in the folks who are going to be most interested. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff around feds and public-private partnerships and policy, and hopefully avoid cryptography. So with that, we will bid you adieu. And Lucky, you can roll our goodbye clip.
Surge.